Welcome to the Mrs. Beastly channel.
I am the Dark Shinigami.
My name is Gerald. I was 28 when they handed me a badge that didn't exist, a keycard that opened doors marked with numbers that changed depending on the angle you viewed them from, and a set of instructions that amounted to one thing: don't look directly at it when it crosses the threshold. I'm 71 now. I've kept this secret for 42 years. I've watched 3 decades of declassification reports, congressional hearings, and documentary series try to explain away what they called mass hysteria, carbon monoxide poisoning, and experimental gas leaks. None of it was close. The phenomenon they officially denied ever existed didn't need a press release, it didn't need a name, but the men who built it gave it one anyway. Shinigami. I'm not here to tell you it's a ghost, I'm here to tell you what it actually was, what we did to it, and why it still waits in the quiet rooms of dying hospitals long after the facility in the Utah desert was paved over and turned into a storage depot for agricultural equipment. The NDA I signed expires when I die, but the truth shouldn't. If you're listening to this because you've seen something that doesn't fit in the daylight, you already know the weight of it. I don't expect you to believe me, but if you stick around, I'll tell you exactly how it started, why I never filed the reports they asked for, and what happens when you try to manage a thing that was never meant to be managed. It began in the spring of 1987, in a decommissioned VA annex in rural Idaho that the Army had quietly leased under a weather research cover. I was a field medic attached to a civilian contractor team running neurological resonance trials. My job was routine monitor vitals, log sedation levels, document patient responses to low-frequency electromagnetic exposure. We were studying near-death neural cascades. That was the official line. The real line was that we were trying to map the moment consciousness detaches from biological function and see if we could intercept it. I remember the date because of the rain. April 14th. The kind of steady cold rain that seeps through your boots and makes the fluorescent lights hum like trapped insects. Patient 7 was a volunteer named Kelly. He was 34, a former coal miner with early-onset pulmonary fibrosis. He'd signed up for the compensation. He knew the risks. He didn't know about the dampeners. We'd been running the trials for 6 months. Nothing significant. The subjects would enter a state resembling clinical death, their brainwaves flattening to near zero, then spiking back into recovery as the electromagnetic field was slowly lowered. It was clean. It was controlled. It was boring. Then the power grid fluctuated. It wasn't a brownout. It was a drop so sudden that the backup generators didn't kick in for 4 seconds. 4 seconds is an eternity in a resuscitation bay. The monitors didn't just flatline. They looped. A single repeating sine wave that shouldn't have been possible on analog equipment. The air pressure in the room dropped so fast my ears popped. The smell hit me first. Wet soil, ozone, and something underneath it like old copper pennies left in a drawer. I turned from the console. The door to the isolation ward was closed. It should have been. But through the reinforced glass, I saw him. He stood at the foot of Kelly's bed. Not walking, not standing. He was just there, as if he'd been standing there all along and I'd simply failed to notice him until the moment the lights died. He wore a long coat that looked heavy, the kind of fabric that absorbs light instead of reflecting it. It wasn't cloth. It was too fluid, shifting at the edges like heat haze over asphalt. His face was pale, but not sickly. It was the color of ash that's been left in the rain. His eyes didn't catch the overhead fluorescence. They reflected the room like still water, depthless and dark. He held something in his right hand, a staff maybe, or a cane, carved from a wood so dark it looked black until the light caught it and revealed a grain that spiraled inward like a vortex. I thought it was a man in a hazmat suit. I thought it was a prank. I thought I'd finally cracked from the sleepless nights and the chemical fumes. I was wrong. He moved toward the bed, not with steps, with a kind of lateral shift, like a film skipping frames. One moment he was by the door, the next he was leaning over Kelly. He didn't touch the patient. He placed the tip of that staff against the mattress right beside Kelly's ribs. The monitor didn't beep. It sighed. Kelly's chest stopped rising. His heart rate dropped to 0. By every medical standard, he was dead. but then his fingers twitched. His eyelids fluttered. For 3 seconds his vitals reversed. Not recovered. Reversed. The numbers on the screen scrolled backward. His breathing hitched, then stopped again. And in that window the figure in the dark coat lifted his head. He looked at me. I froze. I've never been good at describing fear. It's not a spike. It's a vacuum. It pulls the air out of your lungs and leaves you staring at something that knows you're looking. His mouth didn't move, but a sound filled the room. Not a voice. A resonance. Like a cello string bowed too hard, vibrating against the inside of your skull. Yours. Then the backup generators kicked in. The lights flared. The figure was gone. Not out the door, not behind a curtain, just gone. The glass was clear. The room was empty. Kelly's monitor showed a flat line. I called for the crash cart. I performed chest compressions until my hands bled. I didn't bring him back. When I filed the incident report, Matlock tore it up in front of me. He was a tall man with a voice like gravel in a drum, a former signals intelligence officer who'd been seconded to the program because he knew how to keep a secret without blinking. He didn't yell. He didn't have to. "Burn that," he said, dropping the pages into a metal wastebasket. "You don't document what you don't understand. You observe it. You log the anomalies. You don't name it." "What was that?" I asked. "Something that was already here," he said. "We just finally turned on the lights." They didn't let me go back to Idaho. They transferred me to a mobile biocontainment unit that had been retrofitted into a permanent site in the Black Rock Basin, Nevada. The facility didn't appear on any state map. It was listed as a meteorological relay station, then a geological survey outpost, then a private agricultural research campus. None of it was true. The real name, stamped on the intake forms in red ink, was Project Reaper's Shadow. I was assigned as primary attendant. My job wasn't to treat patients, it was to maintain the threshold. The entity, Shinigami, as the files called it, didn't reside in the facility, it resided in the spaces between. We'd learned that much from the Idaho incident. It appeared only at the moment of biological cessation, not before, not after. It was drawn to the neural cascade that occurs when the heart stops and the brain begins its final chaotic discharge of electricity. We thought we were studying death. We were actually studying a filter, a thing that exists in the liminal space, sifting through the static of dying minds, collecting what it's supposed to collect. But we'd broken it. The experimental neural resonance compound we'd been using to map near-death states had a secondary effect. It created a low-level psychic echo, a feedback loop that lingered in the synaptic pathways of anyone exposed to it for more than a few weeks. The echo didn't just attract Shinigami, it fed it, and it corrupted what it fed on. The entity stopped just guiding, it started anchoring. I learned this in the summer of 1988. Teresa was a junior nurse assigned to the wound care ward. She was 24, sharp, with a laugh that could cut through the sterile hum of the HVAC system. She'd been working the night shift when a coolant line ruptured in Sector 3. The leak wasn't toxic, but it was radioactive. Low-grade. Enough to accumulate in the lungs over time. Not enough to kill her quickly. Enough to kill her slowly. I found her in the decon shower, coughing up blood, her skin pale and clammy. I called for medevac. They said the weather was too bad. I called Matlock. He said to stabilize her and wait. I didn't wait. I sat by her bed in the isolation room. I held her hand. I watched the monitor count down the seconds, and when her breathing grew shallow and her pupils dilated, I did something I shouldn't have done. I opened the door. Not to the hallway, to the threshold. I didn't know the protocol. I'd only read the redacted appendices. I knew the frequencies that kept the barrier stable. I knew the dampeners that suppressed the resonance. But I also knew that Shinigami responded to intent, to need. I whispered, "Take the pain, not the life." The air pressure dropped, the temperature fell, the smell of wet soil and copper returned. He stepped through the wall like it was mist. He didn't look at me. He looked at Teresa. He placed the tip of that staff against her sternum. The monitor flatlined, but this time, there was no reversal, just stillness. and then a sound like a deep breath being released. Teresa's eyes opened. She gasped. Her heart rate stabilized. Her breathing evened out. She survived. But she remembered things she shouldn't. She started talking about the spaces between rooms. She described the staff in detail. She said the figure looked tired. She said it asked her in a voice like grinding stones if I was still watching. Matlock came to see me 3 days later. He didn't thank me. He didn't fire me. He just placed a manila folder on my desk. Inside were photographs of Teresa, taken from angles I hadn't been in the room for. She was sitting up in bed, staring at the corner of the room, smiling faintly. "You don't own it," he said. "You just keep the door from swinging shut. If you let it in without the dampeners running, you're not a medic anymore. You're a conduit, and conduits burn out." "I saved her," I said. "You altered the intake," he corrected. "Don't make a habit of it." I made a habit of it anyway. By the fall of 1991, I'd stopped going home. My wife Amanda didn't understand why I missed our anniversary. She didn't understand why I slept in the break room. She didn't understand why I came home smelling like ozone and old books. We stopped talking about having children. We stopped talking about much of anything. I left a voicemail for her once, 3 weeks into November, telling her I loved her. I never heard back. The work didn't slow down. It multiplied. March 14, 1991. Transport convoy accident on Route 50. 3 test subjects died in a head-on collision. Shinigami appeared 3 times at once. Not a duplication, a branching. Each figure occupied a different vehicle, each leaning over a different body, each placing the staff against a different chest. I watched from the observation deck through 3 sets of binoculars. The resonance frequency spiked to 14.3 Hz. The facility's structural glass developed hairline fractures. I had to manually override the dampeners to prevent a cascade failure. I learned that day that the entity responds to concentrated death. It doesn't multiply. It mirrors. June 3, 1992. Journalist named James from a regional newspaper started asking questions. He'd been tracing the budget allocations for the Nevada site. He knew the weather station was a cover. He knew the Geological Survey never sent a single core sample. He came to the perimeter fence with a recorder and a flashlight. I was on gate duty. I didn't call security. I walked out to meet him. I told him the site was contaminated with asbestos. I told him the air quality was hazardous. I told him his source was a disgruntled contractor with a grudge. I drove him to the nearest town, bought him a coffee, and waited until he left. 2 weeks later, his article ran. It was about a meth lab. He'd changed the story. I don't know if he knew why. October 17, 1994. First crisis episode. Containment breach in Sector 7. A coolant pump failed. The dampeners dropped. Shinigami crossed over, not into the facility, into the observers. 3 technicians in the control room started experiencing shared hallucinations. They saw the same figure standing behind them. They heard the same resonance. One of them, a man named Aaron, walked into the sterile corridor and pressed his face against the reinforced glass. He said the figure was waving. I had to sedate him. I spent the next 6 hours manually recalibrating the resonance suppressors while Matlock stood behind me, silent. When the dampeners came back online, the figures in the control room stopped screaming. Aaron didn't remember anything, but he started drawing spirals in his notebook. He drew them on the walls. He drew them on his skin. Two-way learning began in the winter of 1995. I know how that sounds. You don't learn from a phenomenon. You observe it. You document it. You don't have conversations with it. But I did. It started with objects. A dead gardenia on my desk. I don't keep flowers. I don't have a garden. The stem was cut cleanly. The petals were intact. I assumed it was a prank. Then came the child's drawing, slipped under my door. A stick figure with a long coat, holding a staff. Below it, in crayon. He waits. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the observation chair and watched the monitors. At 0314, the temperature in Sector 4 dropped 12 degrees. The humidity spiked. The air grew thick, and on the glass, condensation formed words. Not in English. In a script that looked like intersecting lines and curves, like a language drawn by someone who'd never seen a keyboard. I photographed it. I developed it. I couldn't read it. but I knew it was trying to communicate. I started leaving things out: a book of poetry, a thermos of black coffee, a radio tuned to static. I didn't expect a response. I got one anyway. The next morning, the book was closed. The coffee was gone. The radio was tuned to a frequency that emitted a low, steady hum. When I played it back through the facility's audio system, it sounded like breathing. I began speaking to it, not through the glass, through the threshold. I'd sit in the observation room, dim the lights, and wait. I'd say things. I'd tell it about the rain in Idaho. I'd tell it about Amanda. I'd tell it I was tired. I didn't expect answers. I got fragments, echoes, words that arrived before the mouth moved or resonated in the bones instead of the ears. The line is thin here. They are loud. You remember me. I didn't know what it meant. I still don't, but it was enough to keep me sitting in that chair for years. The emotional toll of this work isn't measured in blood. It's measured in silence, in the way you stop answering calls, in the way you forget what sunlight feels like, in the way you start seeing the figure in the corner of your eye when you're alone in a motel room, and you tell yourself it's just fatigue, just exhaustion, just the weight of 42 years of not sleeping through the night. December 12, 1997. Matlock died. Stroke. He was in his office, reviewing budget allocations for the next fiscal year. I found him slumped over his desk, the pen still in his hand. I called for Medivac. They said the runway was iced over. I sat with him until the paramedics arrived. I didn't leave the room. When Shinigami appeared, I didn't flinch. He stepped through the wall, just like always. He didn't look at the monitors. He didn't look at the doors. He looked at Matlock. He placed the staff against the old man's chest. Matlock's eyes fluttered open. He didn't gasp. He didn't panic. He just looked at the figure, and then he looked at me. "Thank you," he whispered. Shinigami didn't speak. He just nodded. Once. Then he stepped back into the wall and was gone. Matlock was dead before the paramedics cut the IV lines, but he died peacefully. I've never seen a man die so quietly. They didn't bury him. The program doesn't bury its assets. They incinerated him in the site's medical incinerator. I watched the flames through the observation window. I held the obsidian shard he'd left on my desk the week before. It was warm. It still is. January 3, 2001. I was dying. Radiation sickness. Cumulative exposure from years of proximity to the dampeners, the resonance fields, the threshold breaches. The doctors at the civilian hospital in Salt Lake told me I had 6 months, maybe 8. I didn't argue. I packed a duffel bag. I left a note for Amanda. I drove back to the facility. I didn't tell anyone. I just walked through the front gate and sat in the observation chair. I didn't expect Shinigami to come. I expected it to take me. I'd spent years watching it anchor pain, anchor fear, anchor the final moments of strangers. I assumed it would do the same for me. It didn't. He stepped through the wall at 04:22. He didn't place the staff against my chest. He sat in the chair across from me. He didn't speak. He just watched. I watched him. We sat like that for hours. The facility hummed. The monitors blinked. The air grew cold. And for the first time in 42 years, I didn't feel afraid. I felt seen. I asked him, "Why do you stay?" The resonance came through the floorboards, through the glass, through my teeth. "You remembered me." I cried. I don't remember why. I just did. And when I looked up, he was gone. The chair was empty. The staff was leaning against the wall. I left it there. I don't know if it's still there. Succession isn't a ceremony. It's a transfer of weight. Christy is 26. She's a biotech analyst with a sharp mind and a stubborn streak. She found the VHS tapes in the archive room in 2019. She didn't report them. She watched them. She asked questions. She came to me in the break room holding a manila folder and said, "I know what you've been doing. I know what it is. I want to help." I told her to leave. I told her the program was dissolved. I told her the files were destroyed. I told her the truth. She didn't flinch. She just nodded. And she stayed. I'm teaching her the protocols, the frequencies, the lies, the weight, I'm showing her how to read the condensation on the glass, how to calibrate the dampeners without triggering a cascade, how to sit in the observation chair and not look away when the temperature drops. I'm telling her about Amanda, about Matlock, about the gardenia, about the child's drawing, about the way the staff feels in your hands when you're supposed to be holding a scalpel. She's good at it. She's better than I was. But she's starting to hear the hum. She's starting to see the figure in the corner of her eye. She's starting to understand that the work doesn't end. It just changes hands. And it's changing again. Last week, a call came in from a VA hospital in Ohio. Patient 0. A man in his 50s. Terminal pancreatic cancer. The staff reported a figure in the corridor, not waiting at the foot of the bed, standing by the door, not asking for permission, not waiting for the threshold, just present, before the heart stopped, before the brain faded, before the line was drawn. Christie called it Shinigami Prime. I called it what it is. The original is fading. The resonance fields are degrading. The dampeners are failing. And the thing we starved, the thing we corrupted, the thing we tried to manage, it's evolving. It doesn't wait for death anymore. It's learning to create it, or at least, to accelerate it, to pull the thread before the tapestry is ready to unravel. I told Christie not to go. She went anyway. She sent me a text before she crossed the state line. I'm ready. I didn't reply. I just watched the rain hit the window. I thought about Amanda. I thought about Matlock. I thought about the gardenia. I thought about the way the staff feels in your hands when you're supposed to be holding a scalpel. I'm 71. My hands shake. I can't stand the sterile corridors anymore. I can't listen to the hum without my teeth aching. I can't watch the monitors without seeing the faces of the men and women who died in rooms I wasn't allowed to enter. I've kept this secret for 42 years. I've watched 3 decades of declassification reports. Congressional hearings and documentary series try to explain away what they called mass hysteria, carbon monoxide poisoning, and experimental gas leaks. None of it was close. I don't expect you to believe me. I don't expect you to prove it. The files were burned. The bodies were incinerated. The witnesses were reassigned, retired, or silenced. The truth doesn't need a press release. It just needs a witness. I wouldn't undo what I did. Not for Amanda. Not for Matlock. Not for Teresa. Not for myself. The weight is heavy. The loneliness is real. But the purpose is clear. We didn't create it. We found it. We broke it. We tried to fix it. And when we couldn't, we learned to live with it. We learned to sit in the quiet rooms and wait. We learned to remember it. And in remembering, we kept it from becoming something worse. There are hundreds of us. We don't talk. We don't gather. We don't form networks or leave breadcrumbs for journalists or historians. We just keep the door from swinging shut. We sit in the observation chairs. We calibrate the dampeners. We watch the monitors. We wait for the temperature to drop. We listen for the hum. We remember the figure in the corner of our eye. And when the line is thin, we step through it. Not to save anyone. Not to stop anything. Just to bear witness. If you've seen something you can't explain, if you've felt the air pressure drop in a room that should be empty, if you've heard a sound like a cello string bowed too hard vibrating against the inside of your skull, you're not alone. You're not crazy. You're just seeing what we've been seeing for 42 years. And if you're listening to this, it means you're already part of the work. You just don't know it yet. I'm done. My hands are shaking too much to type. My eyes are tired. My heart is tired. But the work continues. Christie is in Ohio. She's sitting in the observation chair. She's watching the monitors. She's waiting for the temperature to drop. I'm going to sit here. I'm going to watch the rain. I'm going to remember. And when the hum starts, I won't look away. You won't either.
Please stay tuned. I'll see you soon, my friends.
Coming soon. The Leprechaun from Hell.